Hello, everyone. Welcome to LARVOL Friends here on our every Tuesday podcast. Here with our colleague Jen Naiff and also our colleague, and we call him engineer. He's many things. Shahir on the line, and just continuing our Tuesday series. And wanted to just do a quick mic check to make sure you guys can hear me okay.
Yep. Voice is clear.
All right. Excellent. That and for everyone in the audience as well. So to continue the setup, here at LARVOL, we produce SaaS solutions, selling software and data supporting the pharmaceutical industry, and have been in that endeavor for the past 20 years or so. And we're actually, I think, have a very interesting topic with a very educated professional in the field who is our new marketing director, Jen. And really excited to learn a little bit more about Jen and let Jen introduce herself. And we'll talk a little bit about perspectives about marketing in the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, we're a support, we're sort of in the support industry for pharma. But I think as anyone listening would know that marketing in the pharma industry is sort of a fascinating proposition and obviously has a lot of differences in different domains from different sides of the pond. And speaking of different sides of the pond, maybe I'll take that as a transition to let Jen introduce herself. And we'll pick up the conversation on pharma marketing, past, present, and future for today's LARVOL Friends. So hello, Jen. Welcome.
Hey, Mark. Thank you. So I joined LARVOL not that long ago, actually. I joined on right at the beginning of August this year. So I'm kind of a month and a half in, which seems like it's been a lot longer than it actually has. And I joined LARVOL as an all-round marketer. So my passion is really kind of all across all of the traditional mediums, such as print advertising. But I do also have like a great love for digital as well. And I've actually, prior to coming to LARVOL, I've got sort of 6 years of pharma experience where I've been client side and agency side. And I actually worked on on Pfizer's campaign for Viagra just before the patent expired over here in the UK. So I worked with the team and created a e-detail campaign. So I've got sort of marketing experience within the pharma space and just general kind of marketing awareness, I suppose. And one of the things that I really love about just marketing in general is the kind of psychology that sits behind the ad and the copy and the creative. And when you then sort of take that through into the pharma industry and you start looking back at what came before what we see today, there's just this vast difference between, like you were saying, Mark, what you see over your side of the pond and what I see over my side of the pond. And especially if you were to sort of go back a few years as well, because the regulations are different in terms of who you can and can't market to and what you can and can't say. And so it's a really interesting proposition to kind of see where we've been, see where we currently are, but also then think about how everything's going to change even more so with the sort of technological advances that we ourselves are seeing and experiencing at the moment. So it does make you wonder where we'll be in the next sort of 50 years or so.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say maybe before we delve a bit more, I'd say within a month and a half here at LARVOL, and it certainly from my perspective seems like longer than that, anything jump off the page in terms of, to play some inside baseball, in terms of marketing our software solutions as products to maybe where you've been in other areas in pharma, generally speaking, or I also know you've worked in other industries. So what's the experience thus far?
So I think the thing is that, and this is something that not many people will agree with, to be perfectly honest. But it's certainly the direction that I take, is that whether we are a B2B or a B2C, so business to business or business to consumer or direct to consumer business, like the theory has to be the same, because we are all still human beings. And with that, I always take the approach that we need to talk to each other through our marketing as human to human. And so a lot of companies will say, oh, well, you know, we're a business to business brand, and so we can't possibly advertise on Facebook. But you know, that director, the sales director, the marketing director, the procurement lead, whoever, they're going to be on Facebook in the evenings, and they're going to be scrolling through, and they might even be on you know, job related groups like I am on Facebook with other people right across the world. And I think that there's this just misconception, to be perfectly honest, within marketing, where if you are in a specific vertical, then you have to stay in that box. But I'm much more of a, we're all human beings, we should all be just able to reach out and talk and just kind of, you know, communicate with each other in a conversational way, because that's how we're gonna reach most people. So I don't see that LARVOL's any different in that respect. And you know, I think that we've got a lot of opportunities ahead of us as you know, we see the marketing team at LARVOL grow. So it's an exciting time to be part of the business and the industry as well.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate that. It seems you've developed more than a perspective than I. It seems like more than a month and a half we've been working together, and
It does.
You seem to have a couple decades of perspective that you just expounded upon, and I greatly appreciate that. I mean that all in good fun, of course.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So maybe, you know, let's as we only have sort of 30 minutes here today, maybe we'll sort of take a dive into the topic of pharma marketing, past, present, and future. And so I guess if that's in 3 parts, we might as well start with past. So I was wondering if, you know, you seem to have a lot of experience here. If there's any, how far can we go back in the past? And is there really any interesting stories that jump out to you about some of the initial developments in how pharmaceuticals or drugs, we'll just call them drugs, depending on how far we go back, how they were marketed. I don't know if that was a question or a statement, but
no,
I get
you. Yeah, I get you. So, I mean, one of the things that's always fascinated me, and every now and then, just as a marketer, like I'll go onto Google and I'll just type in like super inappropriate ad campaigns, or, you know, ridiculous ad campaigns, or whatever it might be. And you always get this kind of stream of images that come up, sometimes linked to things like the History Channel or whatever, where they are going back sort of 100 years plus. And the majority of the ads, if you were to do that same Google search, that come up are actually from the pharmaceutical industry. And that's something that always it always makes me have a bit of a laugh, because I'm just like, well, this is really interesting, because the pharmaceutical industry as we know it is very highly regulated. But if you were to do that search, you would see ads that are, for example, Lloyd Manufacturing, they have or they had a advert advertising cocaine tooth drops for an instantaneous cure for just 15 cents. And like, no word of a lie, you've got this reputable company who are advertising cocaine to cure toothache. You've also got then around a similar sort of time, so this was just before the turn of the 1900s, you then also had Bayer, who were promoting a aspirin that was laced with heroin as a cure for coughs and colds for children. And the reason that they went with heroin was because it was thought that it was safer and also less addictive. So they used it as a non-addictive substitute to morphine. And there are so many different kind of examples of this that now, sort of sitting here in 2022, you're kind of like, that seems really inappropriate. And at the time, though, those are the products that were being sold and also marketed. And they weren't just marketed for adults, they were marketed for children. I mean, there was this, I can't remember the company, but there was also these asthma cigarettes that were advertised to promote a temporary relief for asthma, but it actually says on the ad underneath that they weren't recommended for children under the age of 6. So, you know, you can just imagine it, can't you? Just kind of sitting around. I mean, my daughter's 5.5. And so in like 18 months time, I could just hand her a pack of these asthma cigarettes and be like, here you go, that will cure your chest. And you know that that's a ridiculous statement now, but, you know, sort of back then, whether it was a ridiculous statement or not, that was just part of the course of how people and pharma companies advertised their products, because there was no regulation, and, you know, nothing to kind of help anyone say, hang on a second, are you sure that's what we can give to our kids? So yeah, it's really interesting if you sort of go back that 120 years, the very vast difference that there was before regulations came in.
Sure. Well, I think there's a bit of a balance there. Some are more extreme examples than others, but you know, to be perfectly fair, from different manufacturing companies, and I guess what we'd call pharmaceutical companies today, you know, Watson and Crick hadn't really gotten the DNA structure down until the 50s. So if you're talking early, you know, 50 years prior to that, there was a certain sliding scale of what was known and what was not known, to be fair.
Exactly.
But I've done the same Google search. Not necessarily within pharma. I find the 70s and 80s advertising for most things is rather offensive, but I digress.
Yeah.
That's also easily discoverable.
Absolutely.
So it sort of speaks to sort of when regulations came into place and when things came into their own. I think I'm not as well versed in the structures over in the UK, but I think people listening, maybe you're a little bit more familiar with FDA. But sort of from your research, when sort of maybe did each in their own come into sort of maturity, and sort of where the changes, what were the big changes, if I could phrase the question that way?
So it was the early 1900s when there was this new legislation that came out in the States that was the Pure Food and Drug Act, and that was written with an attempt in order to reform the industry. But one thing that they actually left out of that legislation was they forgot to include the part where it was illegal to lie about the benefits of the drug and what it actually does. And so the companies were all, you know, oh, this is awesome because we can still make all of these claims about how awesome everything is. And there was a ad that was actually challenged in the Supreme Court by Johnson Remedy Co., where they claimed that cancer could be cured. And the Supreme Court, they actually sided with Johnson in this case because they weren't doing anything illegal. According to the Pure Food and Drugs Act, they were acting completely as they should because they listed the ingredients and they listed all that information, but they left out the bit where they weren't allowed to lie about the actual benefits. So that kind of led to like this snowball effect where in, I think it was around like 1927, the FDA was actually created. But it took some time for it to kind of come into its own. It wasn't until around the sort of 1960s that legislation actually started to change, and it had an impact on how those pharma companies could promote their drugs. Where all of a sudden pharma companies had to suddenly prove the effectiveness of their drugs. The FDA also took control of sort of prescription medicines and labeling, and a couple of other things. And that's where you saw like this big decline from the pharma companies being able to advertise directly to consumers suddenly stopped because they now had to actually admit to what the drugs could do. and also sort of show what those risks were alongside, the claims that they were making. So it had, I don't know, the pharma industry, they kind of had this great time in the early 1900s up until sort of 62, and then all of a sudden they had to kind of rethink everything. So yeah, there was that big kind of decline there.
Well, I think even in and amongst that sort of time frame, you have I don't know if I'm inventing terminology as I'm speaking, but a transition from, I'll call them drug manufacturers, to what I'll call pharmaceutical industries. When you talk about a range from 1900 into the 60s. But then I guess, technology's really progressed, starting sort of at warp speed, if you really think past the 50s and 60s. And that obviously is going to have its impact on both regulation and marketing once you start hitting the 80s, especially. So, that's, I think, well, you would know better than me when the shift to direct to consumer marketing actually transpired. Is we're talking about the history and getting closer to the present and future of marketing. But comments or your highlights of sort of that transition of direct to consumer, and my perception is the alterations of and the regulations of marketing to healthcare providers has become especially fomented in the past 20 years. I don't know if that really got initiative from your historical knowledge in the same period of the 80s. This is my thing. I don't know if that was a statement or a question.
No,
it makes
it makes sense. So there was like a massive sort of cultural and political shift that happened in the 80s, and it started to sort of roll through into the industry in terms of like what could and couldn't be advertised. And one of the big cultural shifts is that you started to see that patients were having basically like a more active part in their own medical decision making. And what this did is it spurred the drug companies to basically start back up with their direct consumer advertising. So, the FDA comes in the 1962 era, and then all of a sudden, not even 20 years later, you've got Boot Pharmaceuticals, who ran the first ever direct consumer television ad for a prescription drug. And the whole basis of this ad was that it was saying, our version of this drug is cheaper than this one, so come and buy it. And it was at the time when this particular drug was a prescription only medicine. It's now an over-the-counter, but at the time. And so you then started to get patients going to their doctors and saying, I want this drug. And that was something that then sort of almost snowballed. And you got into a place where if you look back to like 1990, for example, the pharma industry spent around about 47 million on direct consumer marketing in that year. But by 1998, that had increased to like 1.2 billion, which is a massive, massive increase, considering when you actually sort of consider that the FDA is kind of saying, yeah, but you've got to put all of the risks aside. And, you've got all the companies that are stopping that direct consumer advertising, and then us, the people, are saying, I want more control over my healthcare, and so I want to go and tell my doctor that I want this drug. And that is what kind of shifted everything again. And the FDA actually sort of saw all of this happening, and they saw the decline of the spend and in advertising and everything. And then all of a sudden they just happened to kind of release this new legislation that said, you only have to put the major risks associated with your drug in any advertising. And again, that gave the industry another boost again. And that was mostly just on TV and radio ads. But then a couple of years later, they said, now in print, you don't have to have all of the risks. You just have to list the major ones. And so the FDA kind of like took everything away, and then they just gradually gave a bit more freedom back to the pharma companies in what they could and couldn't say within their ads. So it was a real kind of change in that sort of, I don't know, 15-year period from the early 80s through to the kind of mid 90s and then the early 2000s as well. So yeah, it was a big change, but also because companies weren't having to list all of those risks that were associated, it meant that they could also then start using more consumer-friendly language. And this almost ties back into what I was saying at the beginning, where I kind of think it doesn't matter who you're marketing to, you're still just marketing to a human being, and having the language that we use in everyday life and having that sort of conversational tone, I feel, is really important in marketing. And so the pharma companies were suddenly able to catch on to that and be more consumer led in what they were saying in their ads.
I think I can say, Jen and Shahir here in the proverbial studio with us, this is the most historical LARVOL and Friends we have had to date. And I feel like I should be writing more specific and longer notes. I'm running out of paper. But I did want to maybe ask, just because it's a personal interest of mine, and I forgot to warn you that we do always conclude with one take-home thought in the last minute. So you've been given a 4-minute warning in advance. But I did want to sort of ask generally. I think it's maybe fascinating to us on the U.S. side, or maybe I would say North American, but especially in the U.S. side, because we've been going down that history lane. I think it's almost not bizarre, but strange to us that it's such a unique American experience to have direct to consumer advertising at a frankly high volume, depending on what channel you're watching.
Exactly.
That's not the experience in Europe. So maybe you had any top line comments relative to the historicity of marketing within the drug market?
So yeah, it's really different over here in the UK, specifically, because pharma companies aren't allowed to market to the consumers. That's an absolute no. We've basically got an agency over here in the UK, which is the MHRA, and it's the Medical Health Regulation Authority. And they basically control which drugs, so very much like the FDA, which drugs get approval for licensing in the UK that can then be prescribed. But who prescribes or what drugs are then prescribed, that all then filters down into these other agencies that are local around the country. And they're the ones that basically say, hey, we've got the budget and we can see that our population has, I don't know, a high type 2 diabetes risk. And so we're going to put a lot of our budget into being able to prescribe drugs to help with that, or whatever it might be. And so they then take a look at the drugs that are on the market and the cost and the budget that it will cost if they had to prescribe it to X amount of people. And that's how they determine like which drugs, when you then go to your doctor, they will then say, I'm going to put you on this drug. So the whole kind of industry, even going down to sort of saying, I don't know, going to your local general practitioner and saying, hey, you know, we've got this great new drug and it's found to have all of these benefits and everything. You can do that, but they are not the ones that are going to be making the decision as to whether or not it's something they can prescribe. That decision is taken entirely away to these central integrated care systems and boards who say, these are the drugs that you can have on your list. And then that list gets passed through to the general practices. So who you actually are promoting to and marketing to in the UK is just an entirely different audience. It's not consumer. It's sometimes not even the medical practitioner either. You're actually looking at a board of people who are running a business. So it's a vastly different industry.
Well, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to take a massive left turn because we're short on time. But is that a
Mm.
politically? Is that a politically not explosive or a politically involved construct of the decision making for the HCPs? Again, that's
Yeah,
probably another 30-minute conversation, but I
I
thought I'd
know.
ask.
I know. I think the thing is that if you look at it from a different angle, if you look at it from the patient's point of view, you will often hear of people talking about a postcode lottery. So where you live in the UK depends whether you get a specific drug. So it might be that you are 2 roads over from a ICS that has approved this specific drug for, I don't know, let's say breast cancer or something, but your ICP hasn't. ICS hasn't actually approved that. And so if you were to sell your house and move 2 roads over, then you could get the drug. But in your current location, you can't. And so you actually do have stories, especially when it's sort of chronic illnesses and everything, where people do up and move because they know that there's a new drug that has better benefits or whatever it might be that they can go and get elsewhere. So yeah, like you said, we could talk for hours on this. But
Well,
and we're kind of deviating from the subject, and we've not talked about the future, which I think is where actually these two things kind of almost clash, because you've got the vast differences between how pharma companies and drug companies can actually who they can market to, and with technology as it gets even more kind of blurred, the actual country borders, if you were looking at sort of digital, not so much, but if you go into that kind of virtual reality space, then all of those regulations suddenly disappear, and you could very well have people in the UK and other countries where the regulations say you can't market to consumers, all of a sudden in these spaces where all of the drugs are on the table and they're there for people to talk to you about. So it's really, really interesting to kind of think about where the marketing sort of industry, or the pharma marketing industry, could go in the future.
absolutely. Well, I'll maybe if it's okay to do so, I'll take that as the final thought, that the rephrasing is that in a digital world, in a digital marketing world, the boundaries between jurisdictions and between industries becomes blurred.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a subject for a future Larval and Friends, but
Yeah.
I will take that as the final. I really appreciate, and we all on the line really appreciate your time, Jen. And everybody have a wonderful Tuesday. That's it from us. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.